I'm Graziano Marcheschi, and I'm here with Father Douglas Martis and Mr. Christopher Karstens, the presenters of the video program that you have been watching. We're going to spend some time in conversation, and we're grateful that you're tuning in. Douglas and Christopher, first of all, I just want to express gratitude on behalf of the viewers and on behalf of the thousands of live participants who've attended your workshops across the country. You've done a really remarkable piece of work here.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
We've had a great time with it.
Yeah. Why don't you begin by telling us the genesis of this whole project? Where did the idea for this come from?
Yeah, well, I'm an alumnus of the Liturgical Institute and still have ties there through other workshops and some teaching occasionally. And my full-time job is director of a liturgy office, and began to ask fellow students what they were planning to do as we looked forward to the implementation of the Roman Missal, the new translation. And so there just naturally began to be generated some conversation about what diocesan directors, parish directors were going to do.
About 3 or 4 years ago, we got all of the Liturgical Institute students together during a summer session, and about probably 3/4 of them work directly in some kind of pastoral ministry, whether it's in dioceses or in parishes. And we asked them the question, how is it that we can help you in the implementation of the 3rd edition of the Roman Missal? And so kind of from this think tank, they generated a lot of questions, and then over the course of the next year or so, Christopher and I met in kind of seminar, and we just started talking through what was going to be helpful to people and how we could approach it. And we had this kind of intuition of how to do it.
Well, I really enjoyed the presentation when I attended the presentation you did in Covington, Kentucky. You mentioned that you've had a good time doing it, and that seems to be apparent in the way that you present. Yeah. I was struck by how you pulled off what I considered the impossible. 2 people standing on the dais at the same time and not taking turns, but really presenting together. How did you develop that technique? How did you hone it? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Did it take a while to get your stride?
See, Christopher always gets to go first.
It did take a little while, but it was, from my perspective, I think surprisingly easy. I'll give the credit to Father Martis here. He encouraged this type of approach. 6 hours of material is a long time to lecture, and is even a longer time to have to listen to a lecture. And Father Martis has had experience with this manner of presenting. And so we gave it a try, and it's worked very well. What we think it helps accomplish is, apart from it helps people to be engaged, and as Father and I are more conversational, we hope invites others to join in the conversation as well, rather than just having an hour's worth of lecture given to them.
Yeah, this style of presentation was natural for us because this, in fact, is the way that we worked out the presentation, by kind of bouncing ideas off of one another. And what we wanted to do was to model for people how it is that they can approach the liturgy with other people in terms of having conversations about it and sharing ideas and the knowledge that each person has individually. And as a result of that, you come up with something that's more substantial rather than kind of staying in your own little world.
Yeah. Well, I have a good sense of what the viewers are learning as they listen to you. But I'm wondering, after 40 or more presentations, what have you learned?
You get to go first all the time. Go ahead.
What I've learned is, the people who have heard this are enthused and excited and appreciative to see something that's there that maybe before now didn't realize what was there. And I have to say, for my own sake, there's so much about the Mass that I have learned in preparing for these presentations, and from Father Martis, and giving these presentations, and feedback from other people that I didn't know was there before. The greeting, "The Lord be with you." I didn't know that Boaz had said that a year ago. But so it's been a great occasion for me to become more aware of what's happening at the Mass, and the enthusiasm of those who hear it is also very encouraging.
Yeah, both of us have said to one another, at least, that doing the presentations, working through the material, has really been good for our spiritual lives, right? First of all, because in this context, you really have to be aware of relying on the grace of God, right? Because you don't know what any group of people is going to be like, and so you just kind of have to rely on God's help during it all. But one of the things that's been most significant for me in terms of learning is we've had this opportunity to meet people in the church in the U.S. and Canada, all over North America, and boy, we've encountered some really magnificent groups of priests and deacons and lay people that are really engaged in the life of the church, and that's been edifying for me anyway.
You mentioned it's been good for your spiritual lives. I have to thank you because it's been good for mine as well. Just this past weekend, I found myself reminding myself as I was preparing to go to church, remember, you're going there to encounter Christ. Mm-hmm. He will be present in the words and in the prayers as well as in the assembly. You are going there to encounter Christ. As you think back over the many workshops you've presented, what would you say has been the most difficult concept to get across to the folks who've come before you?
Well, I think the most fundamental concept, upon which this whole presentation is based, is that we need to approach the liturgy with sacramental perception. That when we come to the Mass or celebrate any of the liturgies, the words we use, the symbols we use, the people who are involved all have this sacramental quality about them that lead us to encounter Jesus Christ in them.
The church and the music, the church building, the music, all of that stuff, the vestments, all of it has sacramental implications.
Yeah. And for most of us, for most of our lives, that's not the type of perception that we have when we go to our jobs, when we deal with our families. So it requires a formation in us, this sacramental or how we describe a mystagogical type of perceiving that can be foreign to us. And so that's the one thing that we all need to grasp to understand the words of the Mass, I think. Yeah. And that can be difficult.
For me, in addition to that, I think one of the things that we found particularly helpful is helping people understand that the church has her own culture, and language makes sense only in the context of those particular cultures. So in other words, if you approach the liturgy or the language of the liturgy from the perspective of the American English language culture, there are some things that you're going to misunderstand or be hurt by or offended by. And if, on the other hand, you try to understand how it is that the history of the church and the history of the scriptures and our rites and our traditions and so on have all contributed to the language that we use, and also that we need to keep that history and tradition in the back of our minds when we hear these words, then wow, I mean, the language takes on a new character.
Yeah. Well, as you've introduced these various notions or dealt with texts and explained the rationale for using one translation as opposed to another, have there been any areas of pushback from any of the participants?
There are certain words that are more difficult to understand and to explain than others. In the Creed, that will begin, "I believe." That takes some explaining. The word chalice, in the words of institution rather than cup, is another one that requires some explanation. The translation of the word homo or hominis for man is also one that we found is again, it's difficult to put on the ears of the church, the sacramental hearing of the church, for that to make sense. So those I think are kind of some common ones that we find are difficult to explain.
And so one of the things that's helpful, especially in the language that we use, is going back to that concept of understanding the church's culture. So again, in the Creed, the term consubstantial, well, it's not simply a word that somebody picked out of midair to insert in the Creed, but rather it's a word that has a long history and communicates a rich theological understanding of the relationship between the Father and the Son. And that's something that was worked out, with struggle and arguments and debates throughout the course of history. Another thing that I find kind of challenging for people is the whole notion of change, right? And I mean, there's a passage from Pope John the 23rd who talks about people's perception of our historical period, and at one point he says, you know, from the attitude of some people, you would think that history, the great teacher of us, has taught them nothing. Right? The church continues to change and grow and tries to express herself in the context that it finds itself at every moment in history.
You invite questions after each of your sessions. Have you ever gotten stumped? Was there ever a question that you just weren't prepared to answer at the moment?
Yeah, all the time.
Yes, yeah. There are a lot of questions that we don't know the answers to. And in some sort of, I don't know, maybe backwards logic, we're not upset by that because you know, as Father Marta said earlier, we want to try to model for others how to teach this. And if someone thinks he or she has to have all the answers, or be a Latin scholar, or a church history scholar before attempting to try to unpack the beauty and the mystery and the person that's present in these, then that's not helpful. So we've gotten used to saying, I don't know the answer to that, but I think we're okay with that because there is a lot there. And But to make the efforts to try to lead people to this encounter with Christ is the job of every priest and deacon and catechist and parent and individual Catholic.
Yeah, we'll never know all the answers, and the questions continue to evolve. And the questions that were asked to us in July, we went back home and we did some more research, and then we were able to have a response to that in the sessions that we did in September, and so on. So we continue to learn from the participants in the conferences as well as from each other.
Yeah, that's so very true. The questions that we don't know the answer to have only helped to make the presentation better, because it does, you know, spur us on to go back and look things up or to consult others that do know.
And that's one of the things we say in the evaluations, you know. The critique that people offer to us at the end of the sessions, you know, whether they hurt our feelings or, you know, affirm us or whatever it is, can only be good for the people that are going to see the conferences later. And so, you know, if it's not for us, then at least it's for the good of the church.
Anything you would do differently if you could return to the beginning?
I don't know what I would do differently, but I will say this, that since we started to do these presentations, and just reading, you know, the Office of Readings or other liturgical texts, there are passages in them, especially from the Fathers of the Church, that really speak to some of the things that we're trying to convey. And I wish I would have known a lot of these things on the front side of this. And I didn't, and I suspect from here on out, I hope I will continue to learn things too. So I don't know what I would have done different, but I wish I would have known some of these things then. But it's an ongoing and life project. So.
It's great to hear such bright people talk about their own learning process and things they don't know. It's your humility is edifying.
Well, we've been good for each other on that. Because Christopher will call me and he'll say, Douglas, have you read your office today? You know, St. Irenaeus has something to say to you.
That's true.
And so it's been helpful that way.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I would change if I could, and you know, obviously you can't go back and redo something, but this, in a sense, started out as an intuition about not only the way that we should approach a new translation of the Mass, but also the way that we ought to approach the liturgy in general. And I think if I could go back and do something differently, I would want to do two things differently. I would want to be more confident about this approach. It's an approach that, to my knowledge, no one else has ever really pursued. So I would want to be more confident about it. And secondly, I would want to be more insistent with bishops and dioceses and parishes to use this approach to help the faithful enter into the liturgy.
Great. Talk a little bit about your own journey with the Revised Translation. Were there any texts that perhaps at the beginning struck you one way, and then as you sat with them, you felt differently?
I respond immediately always.
Okay.
Right, don't I? And yeah, you know, in all honesty, I would say, you know, I'd come across something and I'd say, boy, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. why did they do that? But that reaction, rather than kind of turning me off, instead said, if it's in there, there's a reason for it. And I want to find